Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWargaming.com. And in this discussion video, we're going to be talking about game development and making your own game and what it takes to do so. And just talking about rules design and a bit about everything. It's been my intent that the Mini Wargaming Matthew channel really delves into that side of things. So whether it's rules development, whether it's figuring out how you're going to manufacture stuff, it's I guess you can call it like an indie game design kind of approach. If you're interested in that, whether you're interested in doing it yourself or you're just interested in understanding how it works behind the scenes, then we're going to be talking about that. And we're going to focus mainly about rules design and game design, I guess would be a good way to put that, and less so in this video about the manufacturing and publishing and all that kind of stuff, although we might hit on a little bit of that. Now, who the heck is this guy, right? This is Tony. Tony is awesome. He is, if you are on our Discord server for Ravaged Star, then you would know him as LowerClassHero. That is his username. I'm not trying to give any quality of his character. Tony's been helping us a lot in Ravaged Star. He's made the army builder. He's the one that decides on the points. He's edited the rules a lot. He's helped me come up with a lot of things. He's actually spent the week here. We've been finishing up the Steel Spectres and making sure they're all good.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been. And I'm probably missing some stuff. But you've also been involved in a lot of other projects as well, in many different capacities and other crowdfunding, whether helping people write rules or writing your own rules or whatever happens to be.
It's been a journey.
Yeah. So let's just jump into it. Let's talk about rules design. So there's obviously different kind of things we can go through. So let's kind of name a few and then talk about each of those. So I think of homebrew, like let's say we're gonna make some rules for somebody else's game, but it's not official. Then there's making rules for somebody else's game, but it is official. Like you've been hired to do so, or you're helping them out. And then of course there's the most fun, which is making your own game. So I think the homebrew one is pretty straightforward. So let's speak to that first.
Okay.
So what do you think is the main influence that people really get into, like the whole homebrewing of existing games?
I think a big part of the appeal of homebrew games is, because we've probably all experienced this as gamers, where you play a game, you're like, oh, this is really cool, I just don't like this one thing, or I think this one thing could be better. And especially when you have a gaming group or people that you regularly play with who kind of might feel the same way, you might all just agree, like it can be as simple as a house rule for a board game. You might all agree, just, hey, we don't like this rule, we're not going to play with it. Cool. And then you can get to the other end, where you and your friends might say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could play this epic mega game that doesn't really exist? And so you write maybe like we'll use Star Wars X-Wing, and then you'll write some rules on how that translates into a bigger battle of Star Wars Armada, and you'll write rules then on top of that on how that translates into this big campaign map that you've put on the wall. And it really just comes down to personal taste and what you and your gaming group are into and what gets you guys excited.
I think it's probably most people's introduction to rules writing is homebrew. And obviously with role-playing games, this is like the crux of playing like games like Dungeons and Dragons is, you can run modules, but most people talk about homebrewing as the way to do it, even if it's obviously not the only way to do it. And even when you run modules, you might change a million things in them because they're usually incomplete or not quite what you're looking for. Yeah. I know for me growing up, that was the big part of it, was getting into games like BattleTech as a miniature game, and then homebrewing different aspects of it, and then getting into role-playing games and doing that. And then obviously on Mini Wargaming, writing narrative campaigns and all that kind of stuff where we're actually, it's unofficial, but it's for something professional.
Yeah, and that's a great example.
Yeah, that's been a journey, because even then, so here's just a fun example. So Gorka Morka. So when we did Gorka Morka season 1 many years ago, I remember I opened up the Gorka Morka rules, and so they're based on 2nd edition 40K, I want to say around the same time of Necromunda, the original. Right. Yeah. So I remember opening them, and I didn't understand all of this. And I was like, I want us to do a Gorka Morka because it looks a lot of fun. There's Mad Max with orcs, right? And I'm looking through the rules, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, these aren't quite right. I'm going to just change this, and this, and this. And I changed so much of it because I'm like, I'm going to improve it. I'm going to update it for 7th edition, which was what at the time. And little by little, as we played the game, I'm like, okay, that didn't work. I'll change it back. By the end, I had almost changed everything back. So I was very wrong about my approach. And that was my first kind of realization that you have to understand the intent of the rules as well as what you want them to be as well. And also, the moment you change something, all the resources that are out there can become invalid. So that's a lot of fun. But that's probably the least interesting of all of them that we really want to talk about.
It is an important first step, though.
Yeah.
That's how you get into the rest of it. Even if you take classes on game design, not all of them, but the way I was taught is before you design your first game, you should take a game that you like and then rewrite it as if it were a different genre of game. So you don't have to change everything, but you have to change enough to where it plays differently. And try that first, and then that gives you because that will give you an idea of what works, what doesn't.
So when you say different,
the same thing as home brewing.
Yeah, for sure. When you say a different genre, do you mean it goes from sci-fi to fantasy, or do you mean it goes from a large-scale war game to a skirmish game? Like, what do you mean by genre?
Even more different than that. So, like, if this is a crazy example, but like if you took Heat, the board game, and you say this isn't a racing game anymore, this is a demolition derby game now, or this isn't about racing now, this is about scoring points along the track.
I see. Like completing objectives along the way rather than just crossing the finish line.
So you're still using that same system, but in a different way.
That's actually a really good idea. I never really thought about, I've done it by accident, by homebrewing so much over the years and doing it for mini wargaming that I didn't realize that was preparing me to write my own games as well. It just was something I enjoyed doing and also thought it was fun to do for the camera as well. But actually treating it as the way to get started. So if you've never done any game design before or rules design and you're interested in it, that sounds like a great way to get started. So just to modify existing rules. Or, if let's say you play a lot of Warhammer 40K and you have a few friends that want to do a campaign together, but you don't like the Crusade rules. It's like, well then try to do better. See if you can write
your own.
Yeah, make your own. Make your own map campaign or your own story campaign or whatever happens to be. Because you'll quickly understand that it's actually not very easy to get it all right. But it's still a lot of fun.
It is.
So as we kind of delve deeper then, so kind of passing the homebrew and going more into, I guess these two kind of go together because it depends on the person's career path, what's going to happen. So obviously most people are usually interested in writing their own game, their own rules.
Yeah.
But you've also had experience professionally in writing rules for other people's games.
Yeah.
So can you speak a bit to that? And if you're able to share specific examples without breaking any NDAs, then go ahead and do that too.
Yeah, so I would put playtesting before this too. So my journey, my personal journey anyways, started from like just homebrewing stuff and changing existing games, and then into playtesting games for people, not just like trying them once, like, oh, this is cool, or no, I didn't like this, but actually playtesting and giving structured feedback. And then from there, you go into helping people write actual rules for their games. So like if you take a skirmish war game and someone says, hey, it'd be really cool if we could do another campaign, but we just can't do it right now. We don't have anyone to do it right now. And so you say, okay, well, whether it's them approaching you or you approaching them, because it could work both ways. Maybe you write a whole... It has to fit into their game, so it's different every time. So I guess there's no generic example, but like if they would like a campaign system and they don't have one and they don't have anyone that can work on it, you say, okay, well I can write this campaign out and see what you think. And it's usually a process of going back and forth because it's not your game, so you have to keep in mind that you're not just doing whatever you want to do. You're trying to make what you're writing fit in something that already exists and fit into someone else's idea or experience that they want the game to convey.
How do you find out, besides like just reading the rules yourself and trying to figure it out, how do you find out what conventions they're using or what is in their head for what it is they're trying to convey?
For me, I can usually tell just by playing it enough. If you play something enough, you can generally get an idea of the feel for like what the design pillars are, what they're going for, what they want the experience of the game to feel like.
Do you find that most games out there, even successful ones, think about that? Or maybe they accidentally do it, or don't do it at all.
Yeah, so some of them are very intentional, and some are just like, oh yeah, I never thought about that, but yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I could tell that your design pillar was this. And they're like, yeah, totally.
Yes.
Yeah, I was that brilliant.
Usually before, if I'm actually going to write rules, it's a very involved process. It's not just something like, you don't just do it and then be like, hey, you want to use this? It's usually a conversation you have with the person that makes the game or the company that makes the game. And then that's when you can ask, like, what are your design pillars? Like, hey, what are the left and right limits on what you want this to do and what you don't want it to do? Because when you're writing rules for yourself or homebrewing, you can just do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. There's no one else to tell you no. There's no one to tell you that's good or bad. But when you're working for someone else or with someone else, whether it's a person or a company, you have to make what you're doing fit into their vision for what the experience they want to convey with the game.
I also find there is
a challenge.
Yeah, I also find there's a challenge in when you're doing it for your own group. You only have to make it work for them.
Yes.
So like writing some of the narrative campaigns, I post the rules usually for free, but I also say these are incomplete. It's just unofficial. I just wrote it for what I needed. But I'd often get people emailing me or messaging me saying, hey, I have a question about these rules. Can I do fill in the blank? And it's interesting that it's like, well, I'm like, you can do whatever you want. But they look at them as almost like a complete rule set. And I'm like, no, I just wrote this for this series of videos specifically. Like, but I want it to work. Death Watch is probably my best example. The series of narrative campaigns where it's all about a Death Watch kill team going in. I've done that probably a dozen times now, and each time I've tweaked it and improved on it. I think at least I've improved on it. But I remember I was like, for one of them, I was like, here's the composition of a Death Watch team. It has a sergeant, 2 regular dudes, a specialist, and another specialist, and here's a list of specialists. And you can only have up to 1 Terminator, up to 1 librarian, that kind of thing. And then I'd had one person say, but I want to do this with my friend, but he wants to do all Terminators. But it says he's not allowed to, so can we change that? And I'm like, sure. I'm like, you don't need my permission to do that. But people still kind of, they feel that way. They see that. And so it made me realize that there's a big difference when you're writing rules for writing for a handful of people and writing for everybody. And especially with Ravaged Star, I've had to kind of think about that. I have to be very clear in many ways. There's certain things I don't have to worry about the wording perfectly, and people can usually figure out the intent. But there's so much that I'm like, oh, that's just how I would have played it. And they're like, well, that's not how it's perceived.
Yeah.
That you're supposed to play it this way. I'm like, okay, so I need to change the wording so that the way I just thought was obvious is obvious. So that can be challenging for sure.
So I was trying to think of some specific examples. So, and like people far higher up than me will tell you, for example, in like Games Workshop, like, if you listen to their developers and their rules writers talk about some of the processes, sometimes, a lot of times, even for them at that level, it's they write rules and then they'll be told you can't do that, and then it's like, okay, and then they'll basically try to like keep trying to publish something, and they'll just keep being told no, don't do that, no, don't do that, and then they'll finally get an answer on like, hey, maybe you shouldn't use this character because there might be some business plans somewhere down the line. Maybe we should not touch that. And
right.
Like, oh, okay.
That's why they're being cryptic and not just telling me.
Yeah. So it happens even at the highest levels. And then with Ravaged Star specifically, because I've helped you with Ravaged Star rules. But when I get feedback for Ravaged Star, it's always in the how to put it. So it's in the framework of Ravaged Star, what I think you want for Ravaged Star, not just what I think is cool or would be better. Because, for example, like one example is when I write rules for just me, like I'm always very clear, very concise, because like I don't want anyone to misconstrue this or think it could be something different, whereas it's not as big of a deal for you.
No,
You'd rather be a little looser.
I actually prefer it a little looser.
Yeah. Because
my experience has been that when I watch companies try to write tighter rules, that it loses a little bit of the flavor. I'm not saying this is a rule. This is not. It doesn't have to be this way, but because there are certain rules that if you want to incorporate, so that one chief example in Ravaged Star is bulldoze, where you can take a vehicle and just ram through stuff and it has to move. There's too many edge cases, and I remember trying to write it over and over and over again to be precise. And I realized I could not, unless it was like 5 pages long. And I tried to cover every edge case that could happen. Like, well, what happens if it can't do this? What
Yeah.
if this? And eventually I'm like, okay, I have to make a choice here. Either to remove bulldoze from the game or just accept that maybe I'm gonna have to make an FAQ for this. Or that people are just gonna have to agree when they do it. And I realize when it comes to like tournaments, that's not ideal. But I'm not concerned about Ravaged Star being a tournament game. Not that it's not allowed to be. Like somebody else could write a tournament document for it if they wanted to, and clean up a few of those things, or remove them altogether. And for me, I'm like, no. I want the heart of I want the spirit of it to be like, yeah, you're ramming through it, it's cool, things are getting bulldozed, and they have to get out of the way, and you just kind of figure out the details with your opponent. I tell you what to do, but I can realize with terrain and other models around it that it can get messy. So that was an example of where I just realized that I was not interested in the rules being so tight that it was just basically lawyer speak almost at that point. Like, please refer to section 5.1.5, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and part of the reason I like doing that is because I come from a background of like competitive card games, and the rule books have to be
they are,
like
4.3.A. Yeah.
They just have to be.
But even then, like you look at Magic the Gathering is a good example. When you get into Magic the Gathering, they don't give you the manual, right? The rules are not written like that.
You rely on another person to teach you the game.
Or the introduction to it, the thing that teaches you how to play Magic the Gathering, it's enough to play.
Debatable.
It's debatable. It's enough. I can say it because I have never read through that manual, and I've played plenty of games of Magic the Gathering. And we've just and we're probably getting some things wrong, but who cares?
Yeah,
right?
We both get it wrong the same way.
Well, yeah, that's just it. Like, we're having fun. It's a freaking game. I understand if you go to a tournament and there's maybe money on the line, or at least prestige on the line, then you need that kind of thing, which is, like I said, if Ravaged Star ever becomes like people really want a good organized play system, I'll probably get somebody else to do it, and not because I'm not interested, but because I'm too close to it.
Well, community support is great too. Like
there is that.
The way FLG used to run 40K events, I think, was amazing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I liked the fact that the ITC and the ETC were separate from Games Workshop, because then that all their decisions, none of them are based off of business choices.
Yeah.
It's like to push sales or whatever it happens to be. And so, that's a good example. It's like even the writing style, the writing ethos of how precise do we want it. Like when something dies, I remember like War Machine had like a 5-step, what happens when something is reduced to 0.
Yeah.
It's like it's reduced to, I don't even remember what they all are, but it's like reduced to 0, then it's, I don't know, there's like,
I don't remember.
There's like 4 things. Yeah, it's like disabled, then and then at one point it's removed, and it's like, and each one of those could trigger different special rules, and they wanted it to be so precise that that there was no doubt what order happened. And there's a debate whether that's a good thing or not. I liked the preciseness, but then I found that sometimes people took that game a little too seriously, even though the game itself was great. So maybe that encourages it. Not sure. That was a bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important one to kind of talk about how the precision of your rules writing and whether that's even an important thing, which of course it might be.
It just depends on the game. Again, because every game is trying to convey a different experience, and it's all really everything comes down to what experience the game is trying to convey.
Yeah.
But when you're working, if you're working with other designers or other companies, it's that's just one example of one situation. But it's important to be able to make that adjustment with yourself.
Yeah. So that's obviously going to be a challenge always, because you're always needing somebody else's approval on what it is. Other than the customer, obviously, always need the customer's approval. So let's jump into then the most freeing of all of those.
Yes.
Maybe. Maybe. Which is making your own game. Well, I say maybe because, like, obviously if I want to homebrew something, that's as free as I want it to be. As long as me and my buddies agree, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah,
so
in
that's
that sense,
that's
more
free.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas this last one, I've got to make sure the customer likes it.
Yes.
So that's not always freeing. Right? And so let's talk about that last one. So obviously we both have a passion for making games, right? And making rules. So if somebody really is interested in that, what advice would you give about writing your own rules?
I would say go through the other steps first, because it is a learning experience, whether you're just making a home rule for a game, homebrewing your own thing, play testing, and giving feedback that's meaningful, or helping out other designers do their games or make their vision come to life, because all of those steps will give you more and more insight into how the process works, what doesn't, and so on. And so by the time you get to making your own game, you have enough experience to draw on to not start from scratch, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it also depends on what the purpose of your game is. If you're just making a game, you just want a complete game and you're just making it for your friends and your play group, that's different. That's very different than wanting to make a game that you want to get into retail one day and you want to publish. They're very different.
Yeah.
Because when you make a game for just your play group, as long as it works for your play group, that's all you have to matter. That's all that matters. And you don't have to do extensive play testing. You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to make sure wording is exact. You just make sure everyone understands.
So let's make the assumption then that we're talking about the second one, which is that you're not making it for your own group, but you're making it because you want as many people as possible to play it, because you dream of that happening, of wanting to have your game out there, however much it is, and however rich you can get doing that, right? Spoiler, much. Not much. Yeah, yeah. If you're here to make lots of money, then I would advise you to go elsewhere. Not that you can't make money from it, you can, but it's like becoming an author. It's like you can make a lot of money being an author.
Yeah.
But even those who make a lot of money typically had to go through a long, grueling process.
Yeah. I would say even the top earners in this industry probably have more clout or more like recognition and like I don't know how to put it, but they're much more well known than they are wealthy from this. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, that's probably not inaccurate. Yeah, you're making me really excited to get into this more. But it's true. I know that from experience. Okay, so let's assume that then. So I would say for me, the tips before we actually get into the rule design itself, besides what you said, is also play a lot of games.
Yeah.
I don't mean a lot of the same game. I mean a lot of different games. And my other main thing too, because we're going to get into it, where you talked about intent, and I think we should really dive into that, because not everybody works with intent, right? They don't even realize that that's a thing they should think about. But one thing I will say right off the bat is, if you are here to invent something brand new, that's also going to be difficult, because most likely your brand new idea is a bad one.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Or just already exists.
Well, that's not a brand new idea then. I mean, if you have an idea for a mechanic that has never been done before, not even remotely close, it's probably a bad mechanic. And it might not be, but it probably is. And the reason for that is because most likely you aren't the first to think about it, and the games that are going to rise up are going to be the ones that have at least okay rules. And because you don't have to have great rules to make a game good, because you can have good minis, good lore, all that kind of stuff. But that's a whole other thing too. Is like you can have good rules and the game won't be popular because you don't have all the other stuff. But if you have horrible rules, that'll stop a game from really developing and getting anywhere. And especially as an indie game designer, you have to kind of, like computer games, I look at the indie game space, typically they focus on the gameplay being good and not the graphics being good or on tons of voice acting or all the stuff. They have to focus on the game being good. So this is in the indie space, I think that's what you have to do too. So let's talk about that how to kind of start something from scratch without starting something from scratch.
Okay.
So I'll just kind of let you speak on that.
So I have, just in my personal experience, again, by going back to learning game design, you start with, for first ever game, you've never done a game before on your own. You want to start with a core concept, and that includes how you want, like what experience you want to convey, right? Because I get a lot of questions from indie developers on like, is my game too complicated, or is my game not complicated enough? And there's no yes or no answer to that, because it depends on what you want the game to be and what you like. If you want your game to be played on an airplane, then yes, you want it to be very simple. But if you want your game to take an hour and you play it on a 6x4 table, then simple is bad. So you start with an idea. So like a good example, my first example was a snowball fight. I was like, I'll make a game about a snowball fight. And so you start there, and then that was off.
It's all right.
So you start with the snowball fight, and then it's like, okay, well, what do you want the game to feel like? What experience are you trying to convey? Like, all right, we'll just do a silly, family-friendly, like anyone can play this 15-minute game about just being silly and throwing the snowballs at each other. Okay, so now you've got the kind of feeling you want your game to feel like just a silly, quick snowball fight. Okay, and then you look at, well, what game type works with that? Obviously not a racing game. So it's like, okay, well, we'll have two sides. It can be any players on the two sides, and it'll be a competitive game, and you'll go back and forth. So you kind of nail down the genre from there. And then from there, you look at mechanics, like, okay, well, what mechanics work? And for your first game, I would advise not trying to do anything brand new or innovative. Just make something that works, because that's surprisingly hard. Like, as you'll find out when you start play testing. So you pick mechanics, like, all right, what mechanics work for this? Do we want to use cards? Do we want dice? And you go from there. And then once you make those, you go through the actual how do you play the game. And you actually then you start writing the rules. Like, I know what the game is about, I know what I want it to feel like, I know the genre, and I know the mechanics I want to use. Then you put it all together, package it up nicely, and now you've got this nice, wonderful board game that you're so excited, or whatever kind of game it is that you're so excited that you've made, and you play test it and you find out nothing works. And play testing is really important. It's probably the most important part, especially when you're writing your own game, because playtesting will show you that really cool thing that you wrote down that you thought was really cool on paper either doesn't work at all or is actually not fun when you do it in practice. Yeah. And so playtesting is a major part of that. And for your first game, it's fine if it's just like you and your family and friends do it. So when you get later on and more and further down the line in the process, it's more and more important to playtest with more people, different kinds of people. So like for one game that I'm designing right now, that I really want to take all the way to the finish line, I purposely play test it with people who don't normally play these types of games, because I tell them, like, your feedback is valuable, because if I can at least make this make sense to you, then that helps me out greatly with like who I can show this to and have play it, because they don't normally do that, engage with that type of thing. But if they're okay doing it, then that's a win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you just play it with people who play a lot of games, they might fill in the blanks that you're missing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, obviously you meant like this, and you're not getting valuable feedback. Yeah. You almost want, at the same time, like, obviously there's going to be, you want both sides, right? You want the people who have the experience, and you want the people who don't. So that you can say, is it beginner friendly? Is it easy to learn? And to those who are more veteran gamers, is it fun? And can they poke holes in it that the beginners wouldn't even think to try?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I understand this. I've played another game like this and I can screw it up by this. So let's see if that actually that's going to happen, right?
It is. And you only get that through playtesting. There's only so much you can glean out of a rule set by reading it. And so after you've playtested it, then you go through the editing process, right? You change things, and then you try it again. You change things, you try it again, and it's an iterative process until you're happy with not necessarily every little detail about the game, because that day might never come. Mm-hmm. But you're happy with the way it feels. You're happy with the way people are experiencing it and engaging with it, and then from there, then you can go, okay, I have a complete game. And you do have to, at some point, if you actually want to do game development beyond just like making one cool thing or a lot of half-complete things, you have to set a goal for yourself and say, okay, at this point, it is complete and done, and I will move on. Because a lot of people get stuck on like developing that one game forever.
Right. Well, that's what version 2 is for, and version 3 is for, right? Like, you get it out there. And like we've seen professional ones do this exactly, right? We can look at Games Workshop being the classic example. They're on 10th edition 40K right now, and 3rd edition Age of Sigmar, and 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, or 9th edition Warhammer Fantasy, whatever you want to call it. Like they've gone through all these editions, and I don't even agree necessarily with the way that they do it, right? Sometimes it feels like they've learned all these things and then they start new. rather than just building on the things that have worked all this time. But there's arguments for both of those, right? Starting new brings in fresh players, whereas just iteratively changing it is not going to do that, or maybe it would. But we see that all the time. D&D is the same thing, right? Like going from 2nd edition to 3rd edition to 4th edition to 5th edition to whatever we want to call the current edition, the 6th edition or 2024. Sometimes they make iterative changes, and sometimes they make like sweeping changes. And so these big companies that are multi-million-dollar companies are still figuring it out. And they definitely are still figuring it out. I can say that with certainty, even if they're really good at certain aspects of it. The rules development is a tricky part, because and I do agree, playtesting has been the most vital part of Ravished Star, and we're still not done. That's going to be an ongoing process. We're hoping to get the rules done enough, but then once it hits like general public, then you're going to have to continue to make minor adjustments here and there.
Yeah.
Because you'll discover new things that even the playtesters didn't really come across, right? Yeah, you can count on a large group of people breaking a game. Is really what it comes down to, or somebody finally solving the game. That's the worst. We see that all the time with big games, because the people post the meta lists, and then the companies have to adjust so that those aren't the most powerful things anymore. And then somebody solves the game again and figures out. And I say solve a game, I mean they figure out the best way to play it. And that wouldn't normally be a problem pre-internet. But now with the internet, as soon as somebody solves it, that propagates, and it can ruin the game.
Oh yeah, and especially depending on what kind of game. So there's the big difference too between designing dice games, card games, board games, and RPGs and miniatures games. They're all unique.
Yeah.
So if someone solves a miniatures game, for example, you can change the faction. We see Games Workshop and other companies do this all the time. You just change the faction and make some adjustments.
Yeah.
But you
change
shouldn't
points,
have
costs,
to adjust core rules all the time like that. If you're adjusting core rules every month or two, your rules probably weren't done. But with board games, if someone solves a board game, and because we've seen examples of this, if someone solves a board game after it's been released, that game usually plummets in popularity and sales, because everyone's like, okay, well, we know how to play it. We'll always play it this way. It's got no value left.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting because the game Dominion. Have you played Dominion?
Yeah.
Okay, so my wife and I played a ton of Dominion, and just the base game. So Dominion is a card game, kind of, whatever you want to call it, and it's kind of like a deck building game. I don't know how you describe it, but you start off with a deck of money. And then you use that money to buy cards that you put into your deck, which then make your deck better. And when you're out of cards, you reshuffle and then you bring them through. So there's this whole cycle of buying new cards, and you're trying to get to a certain number of victory points that you purchase.
It's a deck builder.
Yeah, a deck builder game. But we discovered that if you just ignored all the special cards and just kept buying money, that you were unstoppable. And we tested this over and over again. Because once I discovered it, because I was the one that figured it out, I was like, that can't be the case. So the next time we played, I'm like, I'm not going to tell her that I'm just going to buy money, which she noticed me doing, and she was intrigued by it, but she just kept playing it. And then I beat her handily, like really, really badly. So we kept testing it. So I had her do the strategy, and then I would keep trying to beat it. And we discovered that you could not beat it, that it was unbeatable. Like it was actually not even by accident, because there's a bit of RNG to that game, right? Or not RNG, but you know what I mean, randomness to it.
Yeah.
And but it didn't matter. You could not beat it. That the person just got a runaway victory. So we just made a minor adjustment that fixed it. That we just added one cost to each of the money, and the game was fixed. The expansions kind of fixed it, but that really devalued the game for me. The moment I figured out the one way to beat it. And I don't know if they could have solved that in play testing, because maybe nobody thought of it, because they were looking at the intent of the game, which was to buy not just more money, but also all these different cool cards that you could do fun things with. And so we had just played it so much that eventually I'm just like, I'll just try this. I thought I was handicapping myself. I was like, I'll try this handicap. I'll just buy money, see what happens. And so, yeah, that is one of the things that you really have to watch for, is that as they play test, because in playtesting you might not actually find those things, because people keep trying to play the intent of the game. And not everybody tries to break it, although some do, obviously. But it's a lot of fun. I think it's overall it's a positive experience to go through, even if the business side of things can sometimes be difficult. Like obviously the finances and the marketing and all that kind of stuff. Like even if, I would encourage, if you're interested in game design, I'll echo what Tony said, that you just need to start writing games, whether for other games that already exist or just your own. But just start, it's kind of like if you want to be an author, then you need to write. You can't just be like, let's learn about being an author.
Yeah.
If you want to be a piano player, then there's no other way to become a good piano player than to play piano. And you're going to not be as good at the beginning, and then you'll be better later if you put a concerted amount of effort into it. So make games for your friends, make games for others online, whatever happens to be, and just kind of learn that. There's all sorts of other things we could talk about too. Like I like talking about the modularity of different aspects of the rules, such as you have to kind of approach it saying, look, like miniature war games in particular, you look at things like, what's the activation system going to be? How are we going to resolve combat?
Yeah.
Do things upgrade? Like that kind of stuff, right? And I find that that's an interesting conversation, because this is where I think people sometimes get things wrong, is that they try to innovate all of them rather than just innovating one of them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I love innovating. It's part of my day job. I put it into all my games. But I find that my first big thing on innovation in games is you can't innovate the entire thing. You can't make an entirely brand new system that's never been seen before, for two reasons. One, because there just aren't that many unused ideas out there. And two, because if you make something that is truly just completely unique, never been done, no one's ever seen anything like it, they're not going to have a frame of reference for it either, and it's going to feel totally alien to them. And so those kinds of things, even the ones that are kind of interesting that I've seen, very few of them, but the ones that I have seen, it's like, okay, well, I don't know how to engage with this because it's so different.
It doesn't feel like I'm shooting a gun, when the way to shoot the gun is to draw 3 cards from a deck, choose one of them, which then tells me how many dice to throw, and then I have to take the middle die and look and reference a chart. Then that tells me the cool critical effect. And it could be like, I know that's obviously a bad idea.
Right.
Or maybe I just said an awesome idea, who knows? But that could be the coolest thing, that if people accepted it and really got into it, it was actually a really good idea. Yeah. But like you said, it's unfamiliar. And so,
because if you just do one thing like that and put it in your game, it can be really cool. But when your whole game is like that, people don't know what to do with it.
Or it's just too much to learn.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, it's just like, well, so how do you? Okay, so you move. How do you move? Well, you just take a measuring tape and you move. Like, wait, that's easy. It's like, no, I have a new innovative movement system. Or because you were describing how some people in some games would like put those little things down.
Yeah, the stepper tools.
The stepper tools, and we're going to use these stepper tools in order to move your models. Like those are things where, like, it's interesting because like I look at the example, and I'll be critical of games publicly, but this one I'm not being critical of. So Star Wars X-Wing had like those little movement templates, right? Yeah. Sometimes they're a pain because they get in the way, but overall I kind of like the idea that you're using these different maneuvering templates and this to represent all these different things so that you don't have the measuring tapes. But then they did that with Star Wars Legion, and I'm like, why? Why are you doing that with a miniature game? You don't, like, it's just like, why are you doing this same system? Like, just get a measuring tape out and move. Like this, the thing that worked for your spaceship game, I don't think works for your miniature game. Like, you don't need some innovative way to move models. And yet they had the cool idea that you actually just measure for the unit leader and then you just place everybody else. And I've even borrowed or stolen that idea for Ravish Star, whatever you want to call it. So I like that they did that, but then I was like, but why are you using templates? So, and you might disagree, and that's okay. It doesn't even matter if you agree with me. It's more just like, I don't see, like, it's innovation for innovation's sake.
Right.
It didn't improve anything. If anything, you have to use less terrain. Otherwise, how are you going to be able to get it?
People are going to feel that disconnect, because when you're doing something just for the sake of doing it, it doesn't feel like it's all one cohesive product.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the same thing is for specialty dice.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword. What do you think about dice that are not just, like, you want to be specialty dice that are not just a D6 or a D8 or a D10 or whatever?
Yeah, so we're talking about stuff like Warpro, X-Wing.
Marvel Crisis Protocol.
Yeah.
Games Workshop has it in some of the scatter dice, or Necromunda having the rapid fire dice, or...
I think that there is a time and place for them, and I think as long as they're tied into the game mechanic in a meaningful way that works, they're fine. So Marvel Crisis Protocol, for example, I like them in that game because they have the crits, they have the specials, but it's not like every face is a different combination of them. It's just, every face is a different one. So I don't mind it in that. Games like Star Wars Legion, though, there's almost no reason I can think of for them to have proprietary dice.
Right.
Other than to sell dice.
Yeah. Yeah, because theirs are just basically the red ones. I don't know which ones are which. The red ones are 3 pluses, the white ones are 4 pluses, and the black ones are 5 pluses.
There's nothing special about them. It's just 3 plus, 4 plus, 5 plus, etc.
Yeah, with maybe a couple special symbols on them.
Yeah.
Overall, I've had negative experience with proprietary dice, but at the same time, there are plenty of areas that I realize that I've had positive experiences, like the scatter dice for Warhammer being one of them that I really like.
Yeah, that's good.
Or the artillery dice from Warhammer Fantasy, or the jamming dice from Necromunda, or whatever it happens to be. I really like those. I agree, Marvel Crisis Protocol. Star Wars X-Wing, I like their use of dice, like having that focus thing that you activate special abilities. I enjoy that, although for the most part, it's just treated as a +1. It's like you when you activate these abilities, then the focus token will count as a hit as well. And it's essentially just a +1 to hit.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when it activates abilities. So when you roll the hit, if one of them is a focus, then you also get to do this thing. That's interesting.
Well, and sometimes it's done to eliminate math too. But just like going back to Star Wars Legion again, it doesn't eliminate any math. You're still adding everything up. But in some cases where you would normally roll a bunch of dice and then have to do math to see which ones trigger what, that's what I mean. That's when it's fine.
Yeah. Or if it's fun. Like if you're doing a really, it's one game I'm developing that's really simple and fast game. I'm not going to use specialty dice for it because it's going to be a 3D printable game, but I could picture it there because it's essentially you roll a single die and you have a certain number to hit, but a 6 is always a kill. Like you don't get a defense roll on a 6. It's a headshot basically, and because it's supposed to be just because of what it's simulating. And I'm like, oh, that's where a specialty die would be kind of interesting because then you can have a little headshot thing, and because it's an iconic part of the game. But it's not required because you can just roll a regular die and you know a 6 is the headshot. And so, yeah, it can sometimes add fun. It can be fun to roll it and see symbols instead of like, okay, you need 4s to hit. You roll your dice, and how many 4s to hit did I get?
And another good point is they don't always even have to be proprietary to be special dice. Because shout out to Xeogenesis, which we're testing right now, a game. They have a special die that you roll in every combat, and this isn't their testing stuff, but you roll a different colored dice with the rest of them. Yeah. And War Machine does the same kind of thing, I guess. You roll a different colored dice, and that represents something different, but there's no special symbols, there's nothing proprietary, but it's just another dice that's just a different colored. And that's doing the same thing without using proprietary dice.
Yeah, that's like a D6 dice pool system, right? Maybe one of them is used to, if you get a 6 on it, it's a critical, and if you get a 1 on it, it's a fumble. Like that kind of idea, right? But you want to be able to roll any number of dice. It's like, well, just change the color of one of them. It still counts the same as all the rest of them, but if it's a 6, so that one you could actually sell proprietary dice for it, but tell people, or you can just use a D6.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can have that die be a different color and have a fun symbol on the 6 and a nasty symbol on the 1. And so that it kind of incorporates it.
I'm just also a big fan of thematic dice too, and it's hard to make thematic dice when the dice are proprietary. It's harder, not impossible.
Yeah, so be careful about proprietary dice. For the most part, I've seen them not make the game better. And I'm not talking about dice that exchange a 6 for a symbol. Like that's not proprietary dice. That's just I don't know what you'd call that, specialty die or whatever, or a branded die for sure. Okay, well, we've talked about a lot of things here. I think this video is long enough. I'd love to hear your comments, and I'd also like to know any questions that you have or things that you'd like to be covered in future videos on this channel. As you approach rules design, or as you're just interested in hearing more about it, I'd like to know what I should be talking about in these videos, things that would interest you, things that would help you along, in doing your own stuff, or just being entertained by the idea of how all of this works. So leave that in the comments below. Thank you, Tony, for joining me today, and happy wargaming.